You're watching This Week in Louisiana Politics with Fred Childers.
Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Fred Childers. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. We have a jam-packed show, so let's get started. Congress has passed a bill to keep the federal government funded. Also included in that package is an extension of the National Flood Insurance Program, but Louisiana's senators are still pushing to delay FEMA's newest rate increase. Senators Bill Cassidy and John Kennedy want to extend the program and delay FEMA's risk rating 2.0, which changes a homeowner's flood insurance rate based on their flood risk. Cassidy says this will cause insurance rates to skyrocket for Louisiana homeowners.
If somebody builds a new home and it's not the code, they're going to pay a higher premium. So what we're speaking about is current homeowners that at one point were in code, that were told this is your risk, and now they can get priced out.
Cassidy says homeowners in high-risk areas who can't pay the new rates will drop their coverage. He's asking President Biden to take executive action to delay this process. School districts in the Bayou parishes are working to get students back in the classroom, but they need money from the state and FEMA to start rolling in. Political reporter Shannon Heck sat in on a Senate education hearing to see how recovery is going.
Superintendents from school districts in both Southwest and Southeast Louisiana shared how they're recovering from their respective storms. And a common story that came up today was that they're running out of finances. State Superintendent Cade Brumley estimates that there are still 70,000 kids still out of school a month after Hurricane Ida. Many schools in the Southeast parishes are still working out how much it will cost to repair all their damaged facilities, but it will be in the hundreds of millions. Lafourche Parish is also trying to find a way to waive some of the required minutes for the hardest hit areas.
If South Lafourche High School can't open its doors until October 20th, and I begin telling families that you're going to be in school until July to make up those instructional minutes after the year that they've had, I don't think that's going to be met well.
Southeast schools left the meeting nervous after hearing from Calcasieu Parish and how they are still hurting for federal aid a year after Hurricane Laura. Legislators leaned into GOSEP for taking months to allocate already approved dollars to the parish for roof repairs and buses. The director says they have to review the expenses before giving the money over.
When FEMA obligates that dollar, I'll cut these gentlemen a check.
For school districts in southern Lafourche and Terrebonne parishes, they're still working out how they're going to get their students back in the classroom and how they're going to make up for those lost days. At the Capitol for your local election headquarters, I'm Shannon Heck.
From the classroom to the housing front for hurricane-impacted areas, Representative Tanner McGee says people looking for a place to stay following Hurricane Ida have seen a breakthrough lately. FEMA is reportedly allowing GOSEP, that's the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, to begin its own mobile housing program. This will expedite the delivery of trailers to the Bayou parishes. McGee says this is the first time FEMA has allowed such a program. The traditional FEMA trailers are slated to arrive in November. While housing is coming for some, for others, it is being taken away. Eviction notices started going out in Louisiana for the first time since the start of the pandemic. But some folks aren't behind on their payments. Hurricane damage is forcing them out. LBJ reports.
As if being behind on your rent wasn't bad enough, some New Orleans residents were also being evicted because the place where they live has been damaged by the hurricane.
We're hearing stories about that where tenants are being evicted because their landlords refusing to come fix up their ceiling. We know there was a lot of tenants before Ida who had ceiling issues, and then ceiling collapsed, and then people have to get out due to black mold and other issues.
Clerk of Civil District Court Austin Badon says these cases point to a larger issue in the city, and he's asking all parties to work together.
I've made an appeal to the landlords not to evict unless they absolutely have to evict, because it goes back to the laws of supply and demand. Right now, the demand for affordable, adequate, quality housing is extremely high, but the supply just isn't there.
Throw in a hurricane to damage a lot of that supply, and it is the perfect storm. Badon says that over 400 evictions await execution by judges in the city, and he's also asking for help in Baton Rouge.
So I've written a letter to Governor Edwards asking him to continue the moratorium through October the 29th, just so things can kind of settle down a little bit. People have more time to find quality, affordable housing.
The city has given out millions in renters' aid to help alleviate the situation, but housing advocates say much more needs to be done to help pay landlords back rent and provide renters' rights to weather this double storm of the pandemic and hurricane.
It's not that this is a hard solution, but it takes up rolling up your sleeves. And so long as there's not sustained focus on the issues the working class tenants are dealing with, then we know that we're not going to find a solution.
For WGNO News, I'm LBJ.
Well, the state's indoor mask mandate will stay in place for another month as we continue to fight against COVID-19. Governor John Bel Edwards says the mandate is being extended as we continue to combat the fourth surge of the virus in our state. Now, the mask mandate was reinstated back in August while the state faced its worst spike since the start of the pandemic. The governor says this extension will keep students safe from the virus. After the break, Shannon Heck will join me to break down the major votes that took place in Washington this week, hear how the government is funded for now, and where the infrastructure bills stand. Stay with us.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to This Week in Louisiana Politics. Now to our nation's capital, where lawmakers there have had several bills to consider. Political reporter Shannon Heck joins us in studio to talk about those bills. One bill in particular has been really talked about, and that's the one that funds the government. We avoided a shutdown. What did they end up doing with that bill?
Yeah, so once again, we came close to a government shutdown, but within a few hours to spare, the president signed that into law. So that one, it was a lot of debate around that because originally Democrats had raising the debt ceiling as part of that bill, but they needed at least 10 Republicans to sign on to get that to move forward. But Republicans are kind of joining together saying that they want the Democrats to be the ones to own raising the debt ceiling if that's going to happen. They don't want to assign their names to that. So the final bill that came through, it did not have that language, but the debt limit is expected to be reached about the middle of October. So while this funds through December 3rd, they still have some financial issues to deal with.
Yeah, and that's the thing I want to reiterate. We'll be back in this position and this same argument on December 3rd. This is a stopgap.
Yeah, they essentially kicked the can down the road, but it's going to keep us from all the economic results of a government shutdown for now. But there was a few key things that were in this bill that we really needed right now. For one, for us here in Louisiana, it had Hurricane Ida relief money, about $28 billion. That's going to go to a bunch of the states that were impacted by the storm.
Yeah, and that'll be good. We have a couple of infrastructure bills out there as well. Every year, the lawmakers meet and try to come up with a plan to fund roads and bridges and such. But there are a couple of opposing bills in play, correct?
Right. There are two big bills that we've been talking about for weeks, and they were hoping to pass on Thursday, the 30th. But as of Friday morning, they're still trying to work that out of what's going to happen. So there's the $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill that is being led by progressives and President Biden. It has a lot of what they call soft infrastructure, so a lot more social programs as well as roads and infrastructure of that matter. But some folks on the Republican side,
what they call human infrastructure.
Human infrastructure, yeah. And so a lot of the central Democrats and Republicans are not quite ready to sign on to that, especially with such a high price tag. So conversely, there's the bipartisan infrastructure package, which is $1.5 trillion, which our own Senator Bill Cassidy has been working on. That's a lot more what they call hard infrastructure, which are the roads, bridges, broadband, things like that. That one is sounding like it's going to have a better chance of passing, but you know, there's still a lot of debate whether the Democrats' bill needs to be voted on first and everything. So that's a lot of the back and forth right now.
Right. And finally, the third bill that I wanted to talk about has a lot of regional appeal to Louisiana specifically, and that's the National Flood Insurance Program. It was set to expire. We avoided that, right?
Right. That was a part of the government funding bill. So Our state senators were pushing for that, for the National Flood Insurance Program was going to expire on the 1st, and so now this is going to keep it going for another year. But FEMA is looking to implement the Risk Rating 2.0, which is their new insurance rate assessment program. So if you live in a high-risk flood area, they're looking to raise your rates essentially. But Senator Cassidy and Senator Kennedy, as well as some other senators around the country, are against this because they feel that it's too much of an increase and that policy holders for middle to lower income families are going to drop and not have that proper coverage. So they're asking the president to sign an executive order to delay that.
Cassidy and Kennedy both have defended this this program for several years now, and it seems like every year when it comes up, they have to once again defend it and try to keep the premiums from raising.
Right, they had it successfully stopped in 2018 because they felt that the program was not ready and people didn't know how to implement it. And it's kind of looking that way again, you know, a few years later, but they're worried about those high premium increase. They're trying to cap it at 9% increase because right now people could expect about 18% increase in their premiums, which is quite a bit for those middle class families.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Shannon. And Shannon will be back after the break. She'll sit down with the president of the Public Affairs Research Council to talk about those amendments coming up. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. We're joined with Robert Scott of the Public Affairs Research Council. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, and thanks for taking on this this tough issue.
Right, that issue that we're talking about are the 4 constitutional amendments that voters are going to get to decide on in an extra month since the election was pushed back due to Hurricane Ida. So I want to break down those amendments because they can be a little confusing. So starting with number 1, which is a sales tax streamline, can you kind of explain that for us?
Yeah, and it's a good idea to sort of, get yourself familiar with these before you go into that voting booth and just read the ballot language and try to figure it out. Be prepared before you go in. But the sales tax streamlining really tries to address an old problem we've had here in Louisiana where we're kind of an oddball in that we have a totally decentralized sales tax collection system where all the local governments, they collect sales tax and the state. Plus there's another commission that handles the remote sales or what you might call your online sales. And it's a system that hasn't been very business friendly and it's been complicated. It's created lots of lawsuits over time because each of these different jurisdictions might have different views about how to apply the law on the taxes. And we already have, the highest combined sales tax in the United States of America when you add up both the local tax and the state tax. So there's really a lot at stake in terms of trying to collect these taxes. The local governments have always been very concerned of losing that right to collect those taxes. And because, that's really huge for their revenue streams. So what this amendment number 1 would do is it would create a new commission, and the new commission would be the one in charge of collecting all the taxes from all the transactions and then remitting those taxes back to the state and the local governments that are supposed to get them. It also will help give sort of like a one-stop shop for policy guidance and is supposed to set out rules for audits. So those are really the main things that it do. Even if it passes here in November, in order to be implemented, it has to go back to the legislature, and we have to work out the details in legislation.
All right, so moving on to amendment number 2, which is tax reform. This one relates to our income tax, and this is a little bit more confusing one. So if you can kind of simplify this one for us, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, look, we have a very high individual income tax rate in Louisiana compared to other states that have an income tax. And so this amendment would say it's going to come down, and we also will allow the legislature to reduce it. Now, you might think, well, wait a minute, that's going to take lots of revenue away from the state. But the amendment also simultaneously allows us to get rid of what is basically the biggest tax break, or two of the biggest tax breaks for income taxes. And when you pay your federal taxes every year, you get to take that money that you paid to the federal government in taxes, and you go to your state income tax form, and you can write that off of your income. You can deduct that from your income. And it's a really big tax break. And not many other states have this. It's very unusual, and some of the states that have had it have gotten out of it. So the way our system works now, we sort of tie ourselves to whatever's going on in Washington. If federal taxes go up, then it affects our taxes adversely, both the revenue stream for the state and the taxpayers. And if federal taxes go down, it goes the opposite way. We're trying to untangle ourselves from that federal tax system, and in the meanwhile, give us some of the lowest, tax rates in the country among those states that actually have an income tax.
And then amendment number 3, that focuses on our levy districts, right?
On levy districts. This just affects a handful of levy districts in the state that were created since 2006. Those districts are not able to sort of automatically create a millage tax in those levy districts in order to start getting into operation and doing the kinds of things they should do for water control and flood control. They have to go to the people and get that vote. All the other levy districts before 2006 got to, have an automatic 5 mills that they could apply and get into the actual levy construction business, in a quicker way. So what this amendment would do is it would say in these any of these levy districts created since 2006, you're going to have the opportunity to go automatically to 5 mills, and then if you want anything above that, you've got to go to a vote of the people. It has to pass statewide in order to become active, and in any of the levy districts, the voters in those levy districts, if they don't vote as a majority in favor of it, then it will not be enacted in their levy district.
All right, and amendment number 4, this one seems pretty straightforward. It's going to allow our legislature to, tap into more funds if they need to fill a deficit hole, correct?
That's right, and sometimes you might have an economic downturn, and in Louisiana you have to have a balanced state budget. So if all of a sudden you realize that, officially speaking, your revenue is going to be declining, say in a particular year, well, you still have to balance the budget. And the governor has to go and find cuts in those circumstances. And after he's found a certain amount of cuts, he can go and he can tap all of these various dedications that we have in Louisiana, both statutory and constitutional dedications. And he can take 5% out of those streams and put them into the operating budget to balance the state budget. What this amendment would do is it would say 5% is not enough. We need to go to 10%, and that gives the governor a lot more flexibility. Anything the governor does with this has to be approved by the Joint Legislative Committee on the Budget, so the legislature has some balance of power in this. This is something a lot of people have been wanting to see for a long time. On the other hand, other people say, look, this actually just gives the state more money into its operating budget, kind of builds up your budget beyond what your actual operating revenue are. And so, it's not necessarily a good move. So I'm giving you kind of the pro and the con of number 4.
All right, so 4 big amendments, a lot of changes to our tax code and everything. So hopefully, after listening to you, people are feeling a little bit more confident going into the ballot box in November. So thank you so much for your insight.
Great, and like I say, prepare yourself. You can read our guide, the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. We're known as PAR. And we're on PAR Louisiana, PARLouisiana.org. You can go in, you can see our guide. We've got an in-depth guide, and we also have a mini guide. However much time you want to spend preparing yourself for this, we've got the information there. And those guides don't tell you how to vote. Those guides just give you the information on both sides. You can make up your own mind.
All right, a lot of great information. Thank you so much, Robert, and we'll be right back.
This is your local election headquarters.
Looking ahead to the coming week, Representative Tanner McGee will be speaking at the Baton Rouge Press Club to give the latest updates on the housing crisis in the Bayou parishes that we mentioned earlier. And the first trailers for the temporary housing program through GOSEP should be delivered mid to late this week. The Louisiana Commission on Justice System Funding will also meet to go over funding for that program. Thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm Fred Childers. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you next Sunday right here on your local election headquarters.